Now, there is a ton of young, tech-savvy African innovators that are still making the most of technology to create a more sustainable future for the continent. Now, some of the recent projects include young engineers in Kenya turning salt water into drinkable water with solar-powered desalination plants. And there are so many more other projects that I'm sure that you've heard of. Now, we won't deny that more outcome is recorded outside the African continent, like the AI-powered energy management systems, the blockchain for supply chain transparency, the smart city solutions, and so on. But then, baby steps. Anyways, joining me to have this very rich and very important conversation are amazing studios that I have today. First, we have Oluwaseun Aleshinloye. I hope I got that right.
Yeah,
Lead researcher on Data Consult. Thank you so much, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. All right, also joining us virtually is Tolu Akin-Aribisala, Managing Director, LSFPR. I'm trying. I hope I got that right.
Yes, you did your best. Thank you for having me. It's Tolu Akin-Aribisala.
Aribisala. Okay, I got that. I get that now. All right, thanks for joining us. Tolu is joining us from Lagos. We also have Ayo Onasanya, the founder, Acumen Digital Lagos. Again, Ayo, did I get the name right?
Correct. You pronounced that right.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
All right,
everyone.
great. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
joining us as well. Ayo is also joining us from Lagos. And also joining us virtually is William Boadi, Executive Director, Educate Africa Institute from Ghana. William, how did I do with the surname?
Yeah, I'm with you.
All right, thanks for joining us. I was asking if I got your surname right. I don't know if you heard that. But thanks for joining us, William. All right, so once again, thanks to all the guests, amazing gentlemen and lady. We'll be having this conversation about building a sustainable economy, a sustainable world, especially as it concerns the youth. So very quickly, I'm just going to go straight to our questions, and I'll start with Seun. Now, my first question is going to be, what does achieving sustainable development look like? What would you say it looks like to achieve, for a country to achieve sustainable development?
For me, sustainable development means it starts with education for me, because an educated society always improve on things. And when we are talking about education here, we are talking about both formal and informal education. Like you can see example in China, example in Singapore. So sustainable development is a phase. Is stages by stages. We have to have an educated citizen, educated population. The ratio should be good. Then we move to sustaining agriculture-wise. So we have to sustain. Then we move to tech. So when we are talking about tech, also it depends on the local resources we have that we can use at that particular time, because the moment we start importing too much, we can't really manage that. The influence of that is going to bastardize what we have. So it goes in line with what we have at that particular time and what we can use them to build.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I'm going to ask Tolu the same question, basically. I mean, Seun has talked about it, and I like that he took it from different angles, agriculture, economy, and all that. So, Tolu, the same question applies to you. When we talk about achieving sustainable development, what does that look like to you?
Okay, I'll speak from a more general perspective. I believe achieving sustainable development means building a society where economic growth, environmental protection, and social inclusion work in harmony. Essentially, what I would envision as a sustainable economy would be the ability to meet the current needs without necessarily compromising the ability of the future generations to come. Now, as Seun had mentioned, right, and it all really boils down to creating equitable opportunities, so fostering innovation, whether it's through tech, through health, through agriculture, whatever industry or whatever sector it is. But I think essentially, creating equitable opportunities to foster innovation and ensuring that the natural resources are used responsibly.
All right. Thank you, Tolu, for that as well. I think that both answers have created a more balanced perspective. Now, Ayo, let me come to you with my second question. Looking at Nigeria, or let me say Africa, because our focus is not just Nigeria, but Nigeria is the case study. Would you say that the country and the continent as a whole is tech-friendly in the sense that it enables enough of such development that we speak of?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, a resounding yes, largely because you look at what's happening in Nigeria, which is, again, the flagship, the country that most of us on this call came from. You look at Nigeria, for example, and you see a lot of advancement that has happened, especially in payment, for example. A lot of transactions that you do in Nigeria today, it's like from one bank, your payment can move from one bank to the other in a fraction of seconds. That doesn't happen even in the US. So you look at that and you'll see that even much advanced societies are also looking at Nigeria and taking some note from the things that we're doing. I would say the second part of your question, which is talking about if the environment is enabling enough, that's a different question, right? It's a different question, right? I would say, yeah, somewhat, right? There's still a lot that can be done. One of which is, for example, again, I'll touch a bit on payment. You look at payment, for example, there's still a lot of things that can be done. For example, there's been this push for open banking. I can jump into that much later, but it's a policy that can really allow a lot of the banks to actually be competitive, right? Similar thing that you have within Power that we've now implemented in Power. So I think that there is still a lot that can be done, but that doesn't neglect what we have done today. I was talking to a few people at the recently concluded Moonshots event, and you'd see that a lot of people were coming outside of Africa, outside of Nigeria, will attest to all of the advancement that's happening in Nigeria, especially around tech and things that we have been able to accomplish within in the last 10 years. And for me, that really is an exciting indicator that there's still quite a lot that can be done. There's still quite a lot of opportunities here in Africa, in Nigeria today, even with all of the advancements, where I would say 100% yes, a resounding yes.
All right. Thank you for that, Ayo. I'm going to throw the same question to William. And William, I would like you to speak from a more vantage point, talking about the continent at large, because, I mean, you are joining us from Ghana. So looking outside Nigeria, I want you to tell us if you think, from your own perspective, that the continent is tech-friendly and enabling of some of these developments that we've talked about. In my introduction, I mentioned that, I mean, of course, the continent is, is achieving the feats gradually, like Ayo has mentioned, but there's still some things that we're yet to be able to implement in this part of the world. So would you say that in general, the continent is tech-friendly and enabling enough of such development?
Yeah, I'm considering how technology can shape Africa's future. I will tackle it from this angle. Now, there's no way we can do it without technology. Therefore, as Africans, we must include serious technology in our education system. We are the future. The learners in school, we are the future. The future also belongs to those who prepare for it today. When we check around the world, a lot of people, the Western world, they are utilizing social media wisely. I know Canada, Finland, and Korea, they have even embedded social media as a subject in their schools. So definitely, acquiring knowledge and skill in technology and digital skills development, the use of social media could liberate Africans economically, because we do a lot of things through the digital space. as we speak, I am in Ghana here, and you are in Nigeria, but we are making an impact in Africa, and the whole world is also benefiting from. So I think by so doing, when we are able to include social media and digital skills development, it will yield youth empowerment through the use of social media. And we just attach it to civic education.
All right, thank you so much for that, William. Now, I'll come back to Seun, and I want to ask, several times we hear that on the African continent, we have a stunted growth, and I've talked about that previously when I was asking the question. What would you say is the reason for our stunted growth? I know we have a lot of distracting problems like coups here and there, unnecessary wars, we're having government and governance issues. What would you say is the key reason our growth is still stunted?
I think our growth is being stunted in relation to tech is because of political will. Our leaders lack political will, political will to carry out their policies, political will to follow up on their policies, and political will to maintain when they claim they have created a state of hearts. For instance, there is a particular tech hub at Ikorodu created by a House of Representative member, and I've seen a lot of what is being done there, and other people want to replicate that. Yes, that is good because it's our commonwealth, but on the long run, how are they going to maintain it? When he leaves office, he's no more contesting. How is he going to manage that? Because it's very important we are able to see through what we started. It's very important because when we are talking about sustainable development, it's not something between 2 years, something between 3 years. It's a long time goal. So it must have continuity. Management must be in place. Yes, when it's created, it's always have that, feferity or the way they put it. But in the long run, how are you managing it? And that has been what we are facing as a nation, what we are facing as a continent. We don't have sustainability. Our plan is more of short-term win and celebration. We don't have long-term plan. And this, for me, corruption is part of it, but for me, it's still the political will. If we say, this is our goal, in the next 20 years, we want to have 10,000 young people from Africa leading fintech, leading in food tech, leading in agri-tech, leading in gamification, or all sorts in the tech world in the next maybe 20 years. We can do that, but what are we doing to maintain that? There can be a budget to create that, there can be a policy to create that, but is a long time goal. So what will they do? What are we putting in place? Is it the curriculum? Is it the mind shifts? Is it the messaging? And are the leaders also taking the right initiative? They are showing by example, because that goes a long way. So the key issue is political will in executing the project and maintaining that project.
Thank you for that. And I'm glad that you also mentioned the leadership and, taking the right initiative. And that's going to lead me to my next question. Tolu, my next question is to you. And I want to pick up from where Seun stopped when he talked about leadership and the right initiative. Now, in 2 days, we'll be marking 4 years since NSAS, and I'm sure we're all conversant with what happened on October 2020, where the youths were clamoring for a change in the security, asking that a particular sector be disbanded, and generally asking that bad governance be stopped. Now, from then till now, can we really say that the government has, because if we look at what happened in 2020, the government totally displayed a disconnect from the people. And because of that, it has kind of scarred the youths, giving them some kind of PTSD, where even today, if you ask them to come and fight for the nation, they will tell you there's nothing worth fighting for. So based on what Seun has said, is the government really interested in the growth and development of the youth, especially when it comes to empowering them with access to digital technology, making sure that they have everything that they need to, because at the end of the day, like it or not, the youths are the future of tomorrow. We're talking about the metaverse. We're talking about the technology, AI ruling the world. The youths are the ones who have to learn how to use these tools if they want to live in a better future. So would you say that the government is very much interested invested in the empowerment of the youth in that aspect?
Okay, so I will lead with the fact that, as you said, the NSAS protest highlighted a huge disconnect between the government policies, and the youths especially, we are the front line of innovation and change when you look at it. Now, while it was a moment that exposed deep-rooted issues, it was also a moment that showed the power of youth-driven movements and the fact that it's important for governments to listen, to engage, and work collaboratively with young people, ensuring that their voices are heard in shaping the country, in shaping policies. In terms of the interest of the government, I think we have seen, to an extent, whilst I would acknowledge that there are still challenges, we have seen certain strides being made in developing certain sectors, and enabling, the environments generally. Give the tech ecosystem, for example, there has been growing investment. I mean, where we are today is not where we were about 10, 15 years ago. So I think the government is interested in national progress, is interested in seeing that Nigeria sits on the world map and is able to stand as a leader in, whatever sector it is that we're championing. However, this takes more than just saying that, they're in support or they're willing to move ahead and, support certain policy implementations and whatnot. It takes, partnerships with the private sector. There's a huge disconnect there as well. Sometimes you find that the private sector are the ones really championing certain causes that would benefit the country as a whole. So I think continued investment, continued support in policies that bring innovation are very critical here, and would make the environment more friendly and would really sustain progress.
All right, thank you for that, Tolu. Now, Ayo, we're still talking about, the youth and the things that motivate them, especially in this part of the world. And one thing I can say for a fact is I know that a lot of youth have lost the motivation. They don't have the morale, according to in our street parlance, to fight for anything, to advocate for anything. We call the youth the agent of change, but youth are no longer inspired to even be the agent of change, because if you're hungry, the only thing you can concentrate on is your stomach. So I would like you to speak to that, especially from, when it comes to the issues that Nigeria is facing currently.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head there with that one. I think generally, as you mentioned, right, like the hierarchy of needs, when you consider the hierarchy of needs, you need shelter, you need food, and then, you can start to worry about or think about problem solving. And I think if and when we can actually solve those problems, and if you look at much advanced societies, the government and they've also created policies around solving for this type of things in the past. And I think that we cannot neglect the impact, right, of, just making sure that, food is basically, something that anyone, irrespective of what they earn, can easily access, right? Shelter is not something that, only the rich or only people with a certain income bracket can have access to certain things. It's also, sad that oftentimes as well, you may encounter things that, for example, there are a lot of problems in Nigeria today that people outside of Nigeria cannot relate with it. People who didn't grow up in Nigeria. When I'm speaking to some friends who are in the US and you tell them about the power situation and they just don't understand it, right? And this goes a long way when you start to try to innovate, right? Like I've also seen a lot of young people in Nigeria today will get foreign jobs, but they are not able to actually do those jobs because power is bad, or their internet was bad, connection was horrible. We can talk a lot about like infrastructure, we can talk about policies, but we can talk about all of those things. But when hunger is a problem, then the hierarchy of needs comes into play, right? People need the basic things to basically function, and then when they can function, then we can start to talk about sustainability. Then we can start to talk about advancement of the society. Then we can start to talk about what does the next 20 years look like. What does the next 50 years look like for the country? But for someone who can't even see beyond tonight, right? Like they don't even know what they're going to feed on tonight. That might be a little bit tricky, for them to discuss.
Exactly. Thanks for pointing that out as well. Now, William, I want us to look at the education sector across the African continent. I want us to juxtapose practical education versus theoretical education. Now, we've heard time and time again that in China, for example, the children in elementary schools, even in kindergarten, I know that's a bit of an exaggeration, but you see children in some of these countries building, developing things, smartphones, AI cameras, brainwave trackers, things that the ordinary African might only, dream of, okay, one day when I go into tech, that's when I start thinking of things like this. But in other parts of the world, we see more practicality in the education, as opposed to in Africa, where we have to download books and just read and write exams, and that's all. And we now have to start figuring things ourselves. I wanted to speak to that effect. All right, we don't have William now, so let me just direct the question to you, Shil.
Okay, when we talk about practical, there is no amount of practical that does not being backed by theory.
Of course.
The theory is just a process of doing things, and it's the theory that gave way to invention. For instance, we have cars was built, then we will need the car to go faster. So they followed the process of building that car, then they added something. So I think the problem we have here is that we don't balance theory with practical. So for me to start coding, I have to know the theory of coding.
Yes.
Then I have to practicalize it. So I won't just be watching a YouTube video every time. I have to take my time to do it over time for me to. So it's when I do it over time, I can now see, there is a gap between that I can fill in and create a new innovation. And that is where we are having problem, because when what we base, like you said, what we base most of our teaching, our lecturing is on, this is the process of doing it. And there have been no time where you give them that initiative to do it, to carry out that invention, or to carry out that in what will I say, in the normal form that it should be. So it's the problem we are facing. And I know that there are some factors affecting that, or some factors, for instance, when you go to schools, amenities, there is not enough infrastructures, the ratio teacher to student ratio is bad, the funding for education is below what it should be. And these are the recurring factor that is stunting our growth as a nation, our growth as a continent, especially in tech, where the world is moving. Some days ago, Trump launched I think driverless car, and also launched to the orbit, and there was the stuff came back to where it is. So you can see that theory is needed, but also practical should complement. So if I'm designing a curriculum now, I will design the curriculum for first 5 weeks should be the theory of how to carry out that particular subject. Then the next 5 weeks should be how to do it physically. So for a school that, for instance, I went to a public school, before I start getting acquaintance with computer, I was around GS1, SS1. And my mates in the same vicinity going to private school, yes, we are taught computer, CPU and all, but we have not been typing. So I have to do that on my own. I have to go to a training school that is nearby and all. And there is no way I will be able to compete easily with someone in China or someone in the US that have been seeing it, or using it from maybe 6-7 years. So I think we need to try to make it possible. Government have to implement such policy, and they have to follow through, not just implement with mouth or announce.
Exactly. All right, thank you so much for that, Chino. You're still watching Fafano Africa. Very quickly, I want us to go on a short break. We're talking about harnessing the resources that we have, especially in Africa, for sustainable development. And the major resources that we're depending on in this age and time is that of technology. So stay with us. When we come back, the conversation still continues. Thanks for staying with us. You're still watching Fafano Africa, and we've been having a very rich and comprehensive conversation on harnessing technology for a sustainable future, especially for sustainable development in this part of the world, Africa, Nigeria as a case study. And I still have my amazing guests, Seun, Tolu, Ayo, and William. Thank you so much, gentlemen and lady, for being here to discuss this with us. Now, earlier before the break, Seun extensively talked about some of the issues that we face, especially in Nigeria, translating as well to the African continent. And I also want to ask Tolu about digital infrastructure, right? And in the sense, I mean, digital infrastructure in the sense of access to it. So, Tolu, how, if you were to rate it according to percentage, what is the percent of access that you think Africans have to digital infrastructure as compared to other parts of the world?
If I were to rate in terms of percentage, I would say about 40%, and that's because I believe there is room for a lot more expansion. We've talked about investments, we've talked about policy implementation, but there is a huge gap to be filled. You know, nowadays, I mean, in my firsthand experience, we hear companies seeking expansion into rural or semi-urban areas. Those regions make up a significant portion of our population in Nigeria and in Africa. And the fact that, you know, there's still a huge gap in terms of the infrastructure that, you know, they have access to, they can't, you know, their way of life hasn't been simplified simply because of the fact that they don't have access to certain infrastructure, they don't have access to certain technologies. So I really believe that we have a longer way to go in terms of expanding digital infrastructure. We need to really look at, you know, investments in high-speed internet, for example. I spoke about expanding access for underserved regions, improving power supply, which is a major, major challenge that we face in Nigeria. So, you know, I believe the public sector, the government can create policies that incentivize infrastructure development while, you know, seeking partnerships with private sector to be able to provide the expertise and, you know, the resources needed to scale out in a large way. Additionally, still on the back of education, I think digital literacy, you know, should run parallelly with infrastructure expansion just to ensure widespread adoption and usage, because there's no point providing the technology to someone who doesn't really, you know, understand their way around it, you know. So it goes hand in hand with many things, but we do have a long way to go in terms of providing the digital infrastructure whilst parallelly addressing other areas that align with that.
All right. Thank you so much, Tolu, for that. Ayo, very quickly, I want to ask about community tech hubs. I don't think that I've heard much about those in this part of the world? I know that, there are summits, there are conferences that discuss tech, but community tech hubs, innovation centers, I don't think we have much of that. What do you think?
We actually do have a few, especially in Lagos. We do have quite a few here. I know of a number in Nairobi as well. Ghana, South Africa as well has quite a number. I would say the distribution across region is a different conversation, right? So what I've seen in the past, what I know from experience, and this is from experience having visited these places, is that there's a concentration of all of these tech hubs in the city or in the commercial city of a country. So like you take an example of Lagos and Abuja, but then what happens to Ogun State or Akwa Ibom or up north, what happens in those regions as well. And as we've been talking about sustainability and all of this as well, it's one thing to just have a hub that you've implanted in the city. It's another thing to actually have instructors in there. It's actually another thing to also have a community that and even the resources, right? The infrastructure to enable anyone who comes into that hub to be able to learn, work, connect with other like minds, be able to rub minds and find a problem within their community that they can actually solve for. I think it's also an important place where a lot of bond can be found as well. In the past, you may have heard of stories where co-founders or business partners find each other at the hub, right? And that fosters the power of connections or striking new connections and finding people of like mind within a community. And a hub is an extremely important, a vital place for that to kind of start. Another thing that I've also seen with hubs in Nigeria places that there's also a lot of emphasis on or maybe too much emphasis on people who are only coming there to do work, right? Like, literally just renting a space and you just do your work and then you leave, right? But I think ops are supposed to do a lot more than that, right? I think that's just one of the things that ops can do. Another thing that ops could do is, have a lot of training sessions, especially not even for people who already have access to these things, but also reaching out to the community, to the people that have already been excluded, right? And, bringing that conversation and bringing that home, because inevitably the op is also to serve the underserved and the unserved, if you may. And so literally, in my opinion, I think that we as a people, we need to do a lot more work in terms of involving the people that don't necessarily have access to things. I think, and also, let me backtrack a little bit as well. Oftentimes, you'll find that a lot of these hubs are privately owned, and if a hub is privately owned, you want to run it as a for-profit organization, right? And that basically will change the direction in which things can go, right? So you may not be as focused as you should be with empowerment, but you would be more focused on how do I turn this into a revenue-generating business, and that basically can change the narration of what the ops should do, and eventually people like you and I may not essentially feel the impact of those ops because the focus is really for a different segment. And even for the people that we're talking about here, the underserved or the community that we want to engage with a hub, you also find a situation where they're actually not also being engaged because, again, the owners of you can't blame a private owner for running their business the way that they want to run it. And this is where government intervention can come in, or a collaboration, right, between the government and the private owner to say, hey, we don't run your op for you, but we can partner with you maybe on a weekend basis and just run programs here. There's a lot that can be done. But I would say that we have a few ops here and there, but not just. The distribution is a different topic altogether.
All right, thank you, Ayo, for that. Just like Tolu said, there's always room for improvement. So even if we have that, there's room to get more and to allow people be aware that it actually exists, because that's another thing. All right, thank you for that, Ayo. Very quickly, I would like to confirm if William is with us. William, can you hear us? All right, Williams, we understand that you're with us. I would like to also direct this question at you. Now, we've heard time and time again that, yes, it's good for the youths to have enough digital exposure, but then we can't deny the fact that sometimes there are different, would I say, cons that come out of it, different alterations, people who are, because African youth are naturally very smart people. So you see a lot of fraudulent activities, you see a lot of, defrauding, especially Western countries and stuff. So that has brought about the conversation of digital regulation. So I want us to understand what the balance is between digital exploration that's given the youth adequate access to the digital space to be more creative and digital regulation. William, are you there? Okay, unfortunately, I don't think we have William with us, but Cheon, as always, it bounces back at you.
Okay, in terms of balance between digital exploration and digital regulation, I think we have NCC, we have NITDA, and we have other regulatory agency being empowered. I think what we really need is a synergy of ethics and regulation, because when we talk about regulation, some regulation can cause chilling effects in which the people will not be willing to partake in those initiatives because of fear of being fear of being victim of those regulations, and that will go a long way in affecting how, like I told you, the reason for innovation is about you filling a particular gap. So you check this, then because of your knowledge of both, you'll be like, okay, this gap, and this is what I want to innovate out of it. And when you are innovating out of something, you have to check the regulation aspect of it, the ethical aspect of it, and because as a human being, we are a moral being. We want to do something that won't go against our belief or the cultural context of where we are. So I think there should be regulation. Yes, there should be regulation, but there is a need for a more balanced, a fair regulation, and the regulation must be from the user, user-centric kind of. It should be user-centered, so that when the regulation is coming, there is a way to allow for innovation. So it won't be a regulation that scares people away, a regulation that does not allow people to innovate. For instance, the question you asked the other time about community hubs and whatnot. For instance, there are regulations in place of creating hubs, and there are regulation, there are a lot of regulation. You have to take permits, you have to do this and do that. And when you consider that the funding, the stress, there are some officials that will frustrate your life and all. So there is a need for an environment that allows, yes, there is regulation in place, but also is user-centric in a way so that people can innovate, people can take initiative, and if the initiative is within what will benefit the society, it can really goes a long way.
All right, thank you so much for that. I mean, that's like the best way to have said it. Now, Tolu, I'm just going to ask you the final question. We've had talks about our sustainable development goals, although the timeline keeps changing, but we have goals, and especially when it comes to harnessing the digital space to achieve those goals, where do you see the continent in the next, say, 5 years?
Okay. In terms of achieving sustainable development goals, I think now with investments, coming up, I mean, we've seen a huge rise of tech startups, which signifies that, we are making some progress to an extent, and signifies the interesting investment in that particular sector. However, I think on the path to sustainable development, there are certain things that we still need to put in place to be able to identify and prioritize areas where some of these interventions are mostly needed, which I think is a challenge for Nigeria and for many African countries. For example, one of the primary reasons for misallocation of resources is the absence of reliable data. So many times you would find that we're still operating on the promises from, many years ago. Not to say that it's not important, but in terms of relevance, right? So this can really lead to misguided interventions that may not necessarily target the most pressing needs of the people or the citizens in the country. For example, there's a particular research from the African Development Bank that says that many youth programs are not reaching the rural and semi-urban areas where unemployment and underemployment rates are extremely high, because most of the data collection tends to focus on the urban cities and the big cities. So those areas are underserved because we don't know what they need, and then we're not able to provide the solutions to the challenges that they are facing. So there's still a gap. I think in about 5 years' time, with the rise of various companies, tech startups, with the interest in investment in those areas, hopefully we would see more interventions being led and being focused to those regions. Another point I would talk about is processes in the government which often slow down the implementation of initiatives. So, even when programs are well designed, the process and the approval, the back and forth, it can really stifle the success. And at the end of the day, you find that we lose the momentum, and it's either no longer relevant or it's no longer credible, or it's not serving anymore. But with the way things are going now, I think people are generally being more intentional politically about where the country is headed or where countries are headed in Africa. It's not like before where the youth didn't really take part in determining the political health of its country. So I think now we are becoming more intentional. We are becoming more aware of issues like that. So we're looking at hopefully substantial growth in a few years from now. And just generally speaking, addressing these gaps, addressing these bottlenecks would really ensure consistent policy implementation, and it's very crucial to identifying the interventions that should be prioritized. And I believe that if we continue to leverage technology and foster, an enabling, and the government continues to provide an enabling environment, then every country in Africa can allocate their resources to areas that the different sectors or the youths or the people need them the most.
All right. Thank you so much, Tolu. That's a good way to close the show. I just want to say a big thank you. Unfortunately, we couldn't have William contribute much because of the audio challenges that we had. But I really want to say thank you, especially William. Thank you for at least being willing to join us to discuss this. William Boadi is the Executive Director, Educate Africa Institute, who joined us from Ghana. And we're hoping that some other time we can have you join us to discuss the digital space. Thank you, William. I also want to thank my guest with me in the studio, Oluwaseun Aleshinloye, the lead researcher on Data Consult. Thank you so much for joining us. It's an absolute pleasure having you join us. And of course, she's not the only lady, because I'm also a lady, but the only lady guest that we had today, Tolu Akin-Aribisala, Managing Director, LSF PR, joining from Lagos. Thank you so much. And last but not the least, another amazing gentleman who lent his voice, joining us virtually, Ayo Onasanya, the founder, Acumen Digital Lagos. Thank you so much for joining us as well. Well, it's been a very beautiful... It's a pleasure. Well, it's been a very beautiful conversation about harnessing technology and the digital space to create a more sustainable environment, especially as it concerns the youth. And that's what we do on this show for Final Africa. We discuss issues that pertain to the youth and their challenges and opportunities as well. So if you enjoyed this, join us in our subsequent episode as we discuss more about the youth across the African continent. Thanks to my guests. And of course, my name is Blessings. It's been an absolute pleasure being your host for this 1 hour of Please Join Us again, and do have a lovely day.